Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Sarah Judson. I am a history professor at UNC Asheville and also chair of the history department. And today we'll be doing an oral history workshop that I've titled Oral History Workshop, Humility, Empathy, and Justice. The oral history interview is an intense and personal search to learn something about the history of human striving and endurance. Most human history has been handed down and recorded using oral traditions rather than written records. Written records often privilege the voices and perspectives of elite leaders in society. But the beliefs, practices, and folkways of ordinary people are often ignored and misunderstood by official sources. Oral history is a wonderful way to bring the perspectives of ordinary people to the attention of the public. Oral history can also serve to help individuals, families, neighborhoods, and communities preserve their history for the benefit of their descendants or living neighbors. Oral history can also be used as a tool in the struggles of oppressed people to enhance their level of self-determination and self-respect in society. As an oral historian, you need to recognize that you have ideas about the way the world works that may be radically different than those ideas held by the person or people you want to interview. Be aware of your own biases as you think about your project and try not to let your preconceived notions about the people you want to interview stop you from communicating with them in an effective manner. The main rule is be flexible. While we must follow ethical guidelines in doing oral history, there are no firm rules for conducting an interview, and there is no ideal interview. Each person that you interview will be unique. Each interview you conduct will be like no other conversation you have ever had. This workshop is designed purely as a guideline and should not be considered the final word. So the objective today, here are some goals, which are getting started and setting up the interview preparation, recording the interview, utilizing good interview techniques, and just a few comments about the final product. So first thing, setting up the interview. Think about who you want to interview and why. Who will benefit from your project? What kinds of questions will you ask? You need to think through your motivations, because one of the first questions your narrator, and that is the person you're interviewing, we call them narrators or narrators, OR. The first thing they may ask you is, why do you want to interview me? And what are you getting out of doing this? Another important issue to think about is what kind of final shape your oral history project will take. Are you planning to write an article or to create an oral history archive at a community or a nonprofit center? And I want to quote the oral historian Valerie Yao here, who reminds us the practitioner of oral history has an obligation to tell the person being interviewed what the goals of the project are, the stages of the research the researcher expects them to unfold, and the uses to which the recorded information will be put. So once you decide who you want to interview, you will need to decide on a strategy to make first contact. If you know the person, that's fine. If you don't, you will probably need some help. One of the most important issues at this point is to establish legitimacy in the community that you want to do interview work in. You may need to build trust with the people you are trying to interview. If they do not trust you, you will go nowhere. If you are an outsider and you want to interview a particular group of people, say, for example, farm workers, you need to find out the kinds of institutions that farm workers utilize, respect, and trust in that particular community. Churches are often good places to start. So are, in most cases, community organizations. For example, if you wanted to interview female farm workers in North Carolina, you would do well to contact organizations that female farm workers are involved in. Introduce yourself and your project idea. If possible, ask the organization if they would be willing to serve as a contact or reference for you as you begin to contact individual farm workers. Some agencies, such as senior citizen drop-in centers, may ask you to stop by and introduce yourself during the time when elders are actually in residence. Try to make first contact with the person or people you want to interview by email or by telephone if possible. It is a bit more difficult to establish trust with an individual if you just show up unannounced at their doorstep, which I know none of you would do. Some people set up interviews by going to church services or community centers and giving brief talks about their projects. And I have done that before through the Asheville YWCA, and that really helped build some trust. So too does a promise to provide copies of the resulting interview to the individuals you want to interview. They may want to listen to the interview or just as often have a copy to hand down to children or grandchildren. During that first discussion or email, give the person an overview of what you hope to accomplish by interviewing them. Be honest about your motivations. Give the narrator a general idea of the questions you will be asking so that they will feel prepared for the interview session. Make certain to tell the person that you will be recording the interview because you want to be certain to accurately record their ideas and thoughts rather than relying on your rough notes. In addition, it's really important to explain that the interview becomes the property of both narrator and interviewer, and that you must obtain permission from the narrator before you are allowed to use any excerpt of the interview in a public manner. If the person is still hesitant to be interviewed, assure them that they have the right to decline to answer any of the questions that you might ask. Try to schedule the first interview session as soon after the initial contact as possible. You should schedule the interview at a time and place that is convenient for the narrator. Ask for directions and repeat them back to the narrator to make certain you know where you're going. Okay, preparing for the interview. Before doing the interview, you should, if possible, get some information about the narrator's background and general life experience. And this can be done during your initial discussion with them. Of course, it may not be possible to learn a great deal about the person in advance. However, if you are interviewing, let's say, a North Carolina textile worker, you'll want to have a good background in the history of textile worker life and culture in North Carolina. You may need to do some outside research if necessary. The purpose for this is for you to be able to frame intelligent and successful questions to ask during the interview. For example, if you are interviewing a recent immigrant who has migrated from Guatemala, you should brush up on your Guatemalan history. This does not mean that you have to know everything about Guatemala. It only means that you will be able to better understand the life history your interviewee is trying to tell you during the interview. In addition, this knowledge will alert the person that you are interviewing that you care enough about their history to take some extra time to research it. If you are interviewing folks who have lived in a particular neighborhood in Asheville for the last 60 years, you can use Asheville city directories, maps, and newspapers to get a better idea of what changes the neighborhood has gone through over the decades. You will also want to create a list of 10 sample interview questions, and you want to develop some open-ended questions such as, what was your community like growing up? Could you describe the process you went through in deciding to move to this area to work? What have been some of the challenges you have faced in coming to Asheville or to North Carolina or to the United States? You could ask, what are some of the ways that your community has changed since you came here? And would you share some stories with me about when you were young? An open-ended question is really important because it gives the narrator space to answer a question at length on their own terms. In contrast, close-ended questions are designed to get one-line responses. So close-ended questions are things like, what year were you born? How long have you lived in Asheville? Did you live in more than one place when you were growing up? How many people lived in your household when you were growing up? Which schools did you attend? And sometimes you will need to get basic information regarding names and dates. And so close-ended questions are perfect and appropriate. However, be careful, because if you ask too many close-ended questions, you will begin to get a string of one-line responses, like yes or no, during the interview. So think about how you might structure your questions in such a way that your narrator will feel comfortable with talking more expansively. So for example, instead of asking, do you like working here? You could ask, how does working here compare with your other work experiences? It's really important to remember an oral history interview is not a job interview. Okay, so recording the interview. How can we be certain after the interview that we have really captured the essence of what the narrator was trying to tell us? Handwritten notes are good, but not nearly as accurate or dependable as the recorded interview. But people are very hesitant to allow their voices to be recorded, and for good reason. You may find that you can convince most of the people that you want to interview that a recording is really important because it is a more faithful rendition of their thoughts and life history than hastily scribbled written notes. It gets it right and is not left up to interpretation. So you'll want to select a good recorder that is easy to transport and easy to set up. You will want to practice using your equipment before your interview. Do a mock interview with a friend. Become familiar with the specific workings of the machine, including the steps necessary to begin and stop the interview or stop the recording. Record yourself talking and make some mental notes on how far the recorder should be placed between interviewer and narrator to ensure optimal sound quality. Try to arrange the physical setting of the interview so that the narrator is comfortable and so that outside noises and interruptions are minimized. This is very important. I'll just tell you like a super short anecdote. I once accompanied a friend to do an interview of someone, and for some reason, the friend chose a restaurant. And it was really impossible after we went back to listen to the tape. We couldn't make any sense of what had been said. So the physical setting is extremely important. So of course, check the battery level and make sure the record button is turned on. Stop when you need to, but don't forget to turn it back on. Make sure that your narrator's interview release is signed and that they understand the terms of the release. And at the conclusion of your interview, upload the files to a computer as soon as possible and make duplicates to ensure the safety of the recording. So, utilizing some good interviewing techniques. The success of the interview does depend to a great degree on the amount of trust and understanding the interviewer is able to create with the narrator. Courtesy and empathy are a part of this process. As you start to do oral history interviews, you will begin to understand the importance of doing background research. You will also begin to pick up on other intangible gestures and personality traits that make for a good interview. So when you arrive to begin the interview, set up your equipment as soon as possible. Your narrator's time should not be taken lightly. As you are setting up, give another general overview of the types of things you are interested in, as well as some questions you might ask. At this point, discuss the interview release form and the various restrictions the narrator might want to put on the interview. If the person begins talking about their life history before you're able to start, and this does happen a lot, so much the better. That's good, because this means that you've already broken the ice, so to speak. If this does happen, you might be able to start the interview by saying, Mrs. So-and-so, you were telling about the reasons your family left Florida for North Carolina. Can we go back to this? And can you tell me again now that the recorder is running? Start the interview by asking an open-ended question that the narrator will be able to answer easily at length. An open-ended question could be, could you tell me about what your community was like when you are growing up? Do not interrupt the narrator during this first part of the testimony, even if relevant information to your interests is being passed over. Make a note of it. Make a note of questions that arise out of the narrator's narrative. We want to get the flow going, easy and going. Demonstrate a strong interest in what the narrator is saying. Obtain respectful eye contact. Convey interest by facial expressions and the kinds of gestures you normally use when you are interested in what somebody is telling you. Be alert for topics that should be expanded upon later, or hints given by the narrator of a desire to be asked to discuss in depth points merely alluded to. So be alert for those signs and take note. Listen carefully and pay attention that your subsequent questions do not deal with information already covered by the narrator, and that can often happen, often by the first question that you ask. So be mentally structuring new questions that could be covered. Make notes on a notepad so that you will not miss valuable information. And it's really fine to have a notepad and take notes while you're listening and maintaining eye contact. If the narrator pauses, do not ask a new question until you are certain that he or she or they is not simply reflecting. And this is hugely important too. You want to give people the space and the time to remember things and to decide how they would like to best answer the question. So silence can be a really important and powerful tool, as well as space. And finally, whatever your opinions may be, do not offer your value judgments. Your opinions are not important and can be potentially offensive in this situation. You are trying to find out what this person thinks. You already know your own opinions. Feel free to ask questions that clarify points made earlier, and this is where close-ended questions can be very effective. If the narrator suggests it, encourage them to bring out a family photo album or an heirloom. Always keep the issue of confidentiality in mind. If a narrator shares information that could be potentially or that could potentially harm them, you must warn them that there is no privilege and interviews can be subpoenaed. There is no such thing as lawyer-client privilege in an oral history. If it's appropriate to erase parts of a recording that contains sensitive information before turning it over to a library or an archive, you should do so. If there is an apparent contradiction in the narrator's narrative, do not hesitate to point out the contradictions by approaching them simply as something that needs clarification. And if you have questions that you feel are of a sensitive nature, wait until you have established trust with the narrator before you ask them. This is very often the case when narrators may allude to or quickly or briefly bring up issues having to do with violence, sexual assault, gender and sexual identity, conflicts within a community. Remind the narrator that any part of their testimony may be deemed confidential if they wish. If the narrator requests that you turn off the recording when discussing a certain event, do so without questioning. And always thank the person or persons that you are interviewing for their time and efforts. Being interviewed is mentally and spiritually demanding. People can become deeply moved when talking about certain things, certain parts of their lives. They may even weep. It's your responsibility to show as much empathy as you can during these moments of spiritual anguish. So for the final product, when you are working with your narrator, consider using forms that record family and basic biographical information. Always ask the narrator if they would like a copy of the audio resulting from this narrative. Perhaps remind your narrator that their story helps preserve an important aspect of history, heritage, and culture for future generations. And perhaps mention to your narrator that interviews like theirs can be used as a tool in the struggles of oppressed people to enhance their level of self-determination and self-respect in society. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to your work.